Chapter 1. Introduction. Does knowing more make us happier? There is a question many of us have quietly asked ourselves at some point, only to let it slip away because it feels too distant. The more one learns, the more one knows. Does that mean the more one is happy? It sounds simple, yet if you sit still and let the question echo in your mind, it can stir up an endless stream of thoughts. Happiness is what everyone seeks, but no one can fully say where it lies. Knowledge, what humanity has spent thousands of years accumulating, is often seen as the sure path to success, and through success to happiness. But is that really true? 1. Two contrasting lives. Let me tell you two stories. The first is about a scholar. He lives in a big city, working at a prestigious university. His tall bookshelves are filled with works from ancient to modern times. Every page bears his careful notes in blue and red ink. In lecture halls, students listen intently to his words. Colleagues respect him. Society admires him. But once the classroom doors close, he returns to a quiet house. On his table, only a bowl of cold rice and the dim light of a yellow lamp. At night, he sits alone, facing his towering shelves and stacks of thick manuscripts. He has all the knowledge, yet his smile has faded over the years. Restless, he often asks himself, what is the meaning of life? Where does happiness lie? The second is a farmer in a distant countryside. He has no lofty degrees, nor has he read many books. He only remembers the planting seasons, the harvest cycles, and a few folk verses passed down from his ancestors. In the morning, he leisurely leads his buffalo to the fields. In the evening, he sits by a warm meal, vegetables, river fish, the laughter of children. When it rains, he drinks tea, watching droplets fall on the thatched roof. For him, life flows simply yet feels complete. On one side, the learned scholar, yet lonely. On the other, the humble farmer, yet at peace. If you had to choose, which life would you take? 2. Knowledge, a double-edged sword. We often assume that with knowledge comes success, and with success, happiness. But life is rarely that straightforward. Outer success does not guarantee inner peace, and knowledge, if misunderstood, can become a burden. Think back to childhood. Back then, joy was effortless. A piece of candy, a simple game, an afternoon running in the fields. But as we grow, we learn more. We fear exams, fear unemployment, fear judgment, fear falling behind. These very things we know often rob us of our carefree joy. Knowledge can enlighten, but it can also bind. It is like a knife. Held properly, it helps us prepare a meal. Held carelessly, it cuts our own hand. 3. Why we believe knowing more means happiness. For centuries, society has linked knowledge with status. The educated are respected. The well-informed are harder to deceive. Those who know much often win admiration. This is not untrue. Yet if knowledge is only used for show, for competition, then it is like carrying a heavy ring of keys with no doors to open. The more you clutch, the heavier your hands, and still you cannot unlock the place you truly seek. Meanwhile, there are those with little formal learning who grasp the essence of life, to know what is enough, to love, to share, and thus they live joyfully their whole lives. 4. The question left behind. So in the end, does knowledge really bring happiness? Perhaps the answer does not lie in the amount of knowledge we possess, but in how we use it. Knowledge can bring peace, but it can also stir anxiety. That is why, before we draw a conclusion, let us turn to those who walked before us, the philosophers, the enlightened ones, and see how they understood the link between knowledge and happiness. In ancient Greece, Epicurus, a thinker often misunderstood, noted that knowledge frees us from baseless fears, making us more serene. Then there was Socrates who said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." A paradoxical remark, yet one that opens the door to humility, allowing us to live more harmoniously. And in Buddhism, right view, correct understanding, is regarded as the first step toward freedom from greed, anger, and delusion, toward a life of peace. These three perspectives, Epicurus, Socrates, and Buddhism, remind us that knowledge is not merely about knowing more, but about knowing rightly and living well with what we know. Chapter 2. Knowledge through the lens of philosophy and religion. At the end of the previous chapter, we asked, does knowledge truly bring happiness? To search for an answer, let us take a journey back in time, visiting the great teachers of wisdom. They lived thousands of years ago, yet their thoughts on the link between knowledge and happiness remain strikingly relevant today. 1. Epicurus, knowledge to ease. Our fears, when people hear the name Epicurus, many immediately think of hedonism and imagine he encouraged indulgence and pleasure. But in truth, Epicurus did not teach people to chase shallow delights. Quite the opposite. He advocated simplicity, serenity, and saw knowledge as a lantern to chase away needless fears. Epicurus once said, "If we are not troubled by unnecessary worries, we need little else to live happily." What disturbs human beings most? Fear. Fear of death. Fear of divine punishment. Fear of illness. Fear of what we cannot understand. In Epicurus's time, Greeks believed that the gods determined human fate. They lived in anxiety. If they offended Zeus or Poseidon, calamity would strike. Epicurus taught that it was ignorance itself that created such fear. Knowledge, understanding nature correctly, would free people from it. He explained that death is not to be feared. When we are alive, death has not come. When death comes, we are no longer there. Why then should we fear it? Knowledge for Epicurus was not for clever debate, but for dissolving illusions and baseless anxieties. One who understands the nature of life and death lives far more peacefully than one who only bows and pleads before the unknown. This is familiar even today. We still face similar fears: fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of what has not yet happened. But if we understand the impermanence of life, that everything arises and passes away, we can fear less. This is precisely the application of knowledge in the spirit of Epicurus. 2. Socrates, knowledge as humility. If Epicurus taught us to use knowledge to dispel fear, Socrates offered another view. True knowledge begins when we realize that we know nothing. His famous saying was, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." It sounds contradictory, yet within lies a profound truth. Socrates lived in an Athens crowded with self-proclaimed wise men. Everyone claimed to know everything. But Socrates did not join their parade of assertions. Instead, he walked the city asking questions. What is justice? What is happiness? What is beauty? And the more he asked, the clearer it became. Most people only repeated what they had heard, not what they truly understood. Thus, for Socrates, knowledge begins with humility. When we recognize that we do not know it all, we open ourselves to learn, to converse, to live harmoniously with others. He never wrote books. His life itself was his teaching. He lived simply, uninterested in wealth or fame. Though brilliant in argument, he never used it for boasting. Even when sentenced to death, he calmly drank the hemlock, accepting it as part of life's order, without resentment. This kind of knowledge rooted in humility, helps us shed arrogance, avoid needless conflict, and live in greater harmony with community. We can see its relevance today. Many hold high degrees and titles, but without humility, conflict is inevitable. By contrast, someone who listens well and knows they are not the whole truth wins connection and respect more easily. 3. Buddhism. Right understanding for inner peace. If Epicurus and Socrates were two small lamps in the West, then in the East, Buddhism lit up an entire path. In Buddhist teaching, right view, the ability to see and understand correctly, stands at the very start of the Noble Eightfold Path. Why? Because wrong views are the root of suffering. When our perception is wrong, our thoughts are wrong, our actions are wrong, and the result is unrest. Take this example. We think happiness lies in possessing wealth, power, and fame. We throw ourselves into pursuing them, but once we gain them, we only fear losing them, and so suffering continues. Right view helps us see the impermanence of all things. Everything comes and goes. Nothing can be clung to forever. Seeing this clearly, we naturally loosen our grip on greed, anger, and delusion. When these three fires cool, peace arises on its own. Buddhism does not reject knowledge, but insists that it must be lived. Knowing without practicing is useless. A person may recite scriptures fluently, but if their heart burns with greed, anger, and delusion, that knowledge remains only on the lips. By contrast, one who understands a little, yet lives kindly, lets go, and practices compassion, that knowledge becomes true peace. 4. 3 paths. One common point: Epicurus, Socrates, and Buddhism. 3 different paths, 3 different settings, and yet they converge on a single truth. Knowledge is not for display, but to free us from fear. True knowledge begins with humility and openness. Right knowledge sees life clearly, easing greed, anger, and delusion. In other words, knowledge does not automatically bring happiness. It only does so when it guides us toward peace, simplicity, and harmony. Closing Chapter 2. We have wandered across 3 landscapes of thought, from Greece to India, from Socrates' probing questions to the Buddha's teachings. We see clearly, knowledge is not about how much we know, but how we use it. Now let us return to ourselves. Let us try applying these insights to daily life. For philosophy, if only heard and admired, remains mere words. Only when it enters our meals, our work, and even our sorrows does philosophy become a living breath. Chapter 3. When knowledge enters daily life. In the previous chapter, we journeyed through different landscapes of wisdom. Epicurus reminding us to use knowledge to ease fear. Socrates teaching humility and knowing we do not know. And Buddhism emphasizing right view, seeing things clearly in order to live peacefully. These teachings may sound ancient, but if we never apply them to our everyday lives, they remain nothing more than words asleep in books. Philosophy truly lives only when it walks with us, into our meals, into the marketplace, into our morning commute, and even into those quiet moments when we face sadness. So then, what can knowledge actually do for us today? 1. When knowledge touches everyday fears. Remember Epicurus' words, much of our suffering comes from fear. Not only fear of death, but also very ordinary fears. Fear of failing an exam, fear of losing a job, fear of being judged by others, fear of aging, of illness. Have you ever spent a sleepless night worrying about a meeting the next day? Or felt your heart race at the thought of speaking in public? Often fears grow not because they are truly terrifying, but because we don't understand them. Like a child who trembles at a shadow in the yard, thinking it's a ghost, until the light is switched on and it turns out to be just a tree. Knowledge is that light. When we see things clearly, fear dissolves. For example, we fear failure. Yet failure is only an experience, a lesson. Someone who has never failed has often never learned deeply. So why fear it? Applying Epicurus's spirit, we can remind ourselves, is this really frightening, or am I magnifying it in my mind? 2. When knowledge teaches humility. A friend once told me his story. He had just finished a short course on stock investing and read a few books. Convinced he had discovered the secret to success, he began trading boldly. Within months, his account nearly vanished. He laughed bitterly as he said, "Back then, I thought I knew, but in truth, I knew nothing." I immediately thought of Socrates. The greatest trap is not ignorance, it is thinking we already know. We do this all the time. We read one article and think we understand the economy. We watch one online video and believe we know health inside out. We learn one new skill and think we've become a master. But the more we learn, the more we see how vast the ocean of knowledge truly is. The humble person pauses to ask, do I truly understand, or do I only know the surface? This humility does not diminish us. On the contrary, it makes us easier to approach, easier to teach, easier to live with. Real knowledge is not a fancy coat to show off. It is a mirror that helps us see ourselves. 3. When knowledge helps us let go. Buddhism speaks of right view, seeing things correctly to loosen greed, anger, and delusion. Think about it. Much of our suffering arises from clinging. We try to hold on to wealth, to status, even to relationships. But life is impermanent. The tighter we cling, the more we suffer. One friend confided, "I was miserable because I kept clinging to my old job, even though it no longer fit. I was afraid to let go, yet exhausted to stay." I reminded her to look through the lens of impermanence. A job is like a coat. When it fits, it keeps you warm. When it's too tight, it hurts. Seeing this truth, she slowly lightened her grip and eventually found the courage to move in a new direction. That is right view in daily life. Seeing reality clearly enough to know when to let go. 4. Knowledge at the table and in relationships. It may sound lofty, but in fact, knowledge shows up in small things. At the table, eating just enough, not letting the eyes be bigger than the stomach. That is knowledge of the body and the wisdom of simplicity. In family life, during conflict, instead of proving we are right, we can ask, am I falling into the trap of ego? That is the wisdom of Socrates. At work, when deadlines weigh on us, we can pause. Is this really as frightening as I imagine? That is the light of Epicurus. Knowledge is not somewhere far away. It is in the moment we pause, observe, and adjust. 5. A day lived with knowledge. Imagine a day lived in the spirit of Epicurus, Socrates, and Buddhism. In the morning, instead of rushing to check the phone, we breathe deeply and smile. I still have one more day to live. What is there to fear? On the road, instead of fuming in traffic, we think, everyone is in a hurry. My anger won't clear the streets. Better to listen to some music. Meeting a difficult colleague, instead of reacting harshly, we recall Socrates. Perhaps I have not understood their point of view yet. In the evening, instead of clinging to unfinished tasks, we give time to family, to a cup of tea, to a page of a book. Such a day may not be perfect, but it is surely lighter, calmer, more peaceful. 6. Knowledge and simple happiness. In the end, knowledge is not meant to make us the smartest or the best. It is meant to make us the most at peace. Epicurus reminds us, fear less. Socrates reminds us, be less arrogant. Buddhism reminds us, cling less. If each day we lessen fear, arrogance, and clinging a little, happiness will quietly blossom. Closing Chapter 3. When knowledge enters daily life, we realize it is not locked inside books, but present in each breath, each glance, in the way we face our fears, in the way we speak a kind word to those we love. With Chapter 4, Knowledge in the Lamp That Leads to Peace. There's a little story a teacher once told me, and it has stayed with me ever since. Long ago, 2 students set out in search of happiness. The first roamed far and wide, into great libraries, into renowned academies, gathering books and knowledge. The second went into small villages, sat with farmers, listened to life stories, watched the changing seasons, and learned the art of simple living. Years later, they met again. The first had countless books, yet his face was heavy, burdened by the endless things he still did not know. The second had few books, but his eyes were bright, his smile gentle. He had learned how to live in harmony. So, which of them was happier? The answer is not simple. Knowledge in itself does not bring happiness. It is like a lamp. If we light it, it illuminates the path. If we merely carry it unlit, it becomes a heavy burden. When knowledge becomes a burden. In truth, there are many who are well-read and knowledgeable, yet restless. Professors with deep learning may feel lonely. People with endless information may still lie awake at night, anxious. The reason is this: knowledge has been collected, but not digested. Like overeating without proper digestion, the mind becomes clogged and heavy. If knowledge is used merely to argue, to boast, or to prove superiority, then it becomes a burden. It inflates the ego, and when the ego grows, happiness shrinks. 2. When knowledge becomes light. But when knowledge is used to illuminate the self, every page of philosophy, every word of wisdom can shine like a lamp. Epicurus teaches us to lessen our fears. Socrates teaches us humility. Buddhism teaches us right view, to loosen greed and anger. If we light all 3 lamps, how much brighter our lives would be. Imagine, a person who understands impermanence will not cling too tightly to loss. One who knows they do not know everything will listen more, live more harmoniously. One who no longer fears death will step forward with courage. This is the power of knowledge, when it is lit. 3. Why do we learn? This question seems simple, but many study their whole lives without answering it. We do not learn just to stack up diplomas. We do not learn just to win arguments. We do not learn to show off intelligence. We learn in order to live more peacefully. A person learns to cook, not to boast of fancy dishes, but to bring the family together. A person learns to drive, not to flaunt speed, but to arrive safely. A person learns philosophy, not to speak obscure words, but to rest in a calmer heart. 4. Knowledge in the modern world today, information floods our lives. With a phone, we can access endless news and lessons from around the world. But more information does not always mean more peace. Sometimes the more we read, the more restless, anxious, and envious we become. So the key is not how much we know, but what we know and how we use it. To know death is natural, fear less. To know we do not know everything, shed arrogance. To know all things are impermanent, loosen greed and attachment. Just these 3 insights alone can bring a person great peace. 5. A simple reminder. I know a farmer with little formal education, yet each morning he waters his garden, greets the sunrise, and each evening he shares tea with his family. I once asked him, "Do you consider your life happy?" He smiled gently. "Of course, because I know what is enough, that is living wisdom, the kind of knowledge not found in books, but available to anyone willing to learn." So happiness is not about how much we know, but how we use what we know. 6. Closing the circle. Let us return to the question from the beginning. Do people who know more live happier lives? The answer is, only if knowledge is used to nourish the soul. If we learn to compete, we grow weary. If we learn to boast, we grow lonely. If we learn to live peacefully, we grow happy. The closing message is simple. Learn in order to live happily, not to outshine others.